On the night of December 7, 1930, in San Francisco, California, 35-year-old nurse Marietta Cruz was on the night shift at the Magdalene Asylum. As the clock struck 3:30 a.m., she caught a glimpse of something moving quickly down the dark hallway. Determined to investigate, she could never have imagined the harrowing events that would follow, leaving her in a catatonic state for 2 years. When she finally emerged from this state, she recounted the terrifying ordeal to authorities in grim detail, though they were never able to fully understand what had happened that night. The following is the story she told authorities. "I have been in a coma for the last 2 years, and every day since, I have relived that night over and over in my mind. The nightmare is constantly replaying, haunting me every day. It was the middle of the night, precisely 3:30 a.m. I was sitting at the front desk, writing down notes regarding a patient I had just given an injection to, when I saw something move quickly down the hallway to my left. It startled me at first, and I thought perhaps a patient had gotten out of their room. But whatever it was, appeared too low to the ground to be a person. This frightened me because we housed some dangerous individuals, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was simply too low to be human. I was alone at the time, as my coworkers had just gone on their lunch break, and I didn't want to disturb them if it turned out to be nothing. I debated whether to get them, but decided to investigate myself first. I stood up from the desk, took a deep breath, and started walking down the hallway where I had seen the movement. Since it was the middle of the night, the lights were off. Rather than risk waking the patients by turning them on, I returned to the front desk to grab the flashlight we kept there. I immediately turned on the flashlight and began slowly walking down the hallway. This particular hallway was long, with several spots leading to other hallways, so there were many areas to check. As I walked along, I checked each door to ensure none were open. Suddenly, I heard what sounded like fingernails tapping and moving swiftly across the tile floor somewhere in the darkness. I froze in place, trying to spot the source of the noise with the flashlight. "Who's there? Come out." "This is Nurse Cruz," I called out, but there was nothing but eerie silence. I continued moving the flashlight around, trying to find what had made the noise. I whispered to myself, "I need to go get help," as fear surged through me. Yet something, maybe curiosity, pushed me forward. I continued walking towards the source of the sound. As I reached the end of the hallway and prepared to turn a corner, I heard the scurrying noise again. My hand trembled in fear, nearly causing me to drop the flashlight. At that moment, I knew I should have turned around to get help from my coworkers, but something compelled me to keep moving forward. As I turned the corner, I felt a rush of cold air and sensed something behind me. Suddenly, I felt something run up my leg, and I shrieked in horror. Whatever it was, it climbed up my back and attached itself to the back of my head. Marietta Cruz's account of that night remains one of the most chilling tales in the history of the Magdalene Asylum. Despite thorough investigations, authorities were never able to reach a conclusion about what happened, leaving the events of that fateful night shrouded in mystery. The next thing I remember, I found myself lying on my stomach under a bed with my head turned to the side. I tried to move, but I couldn't. "What the hell is going on?" I thought, my mind racing with fear and confusion. Suddenly, I heard footsteps approaching the bed behind me. The footsteps stopped abruptly, and once again, I heard that scurrying sound across the floor. I considered screaming for help, but since I couldn't move, I decided to remain silent. I could only move my eyes, desperately trying to look around and see what was making the noise, but there was nothing in front of me. Then, I felt something slowly moving up my right leg. Without warning, it grabbed me and began pulling me out from under the bed and out of the room. I was quickly dragged across the cold tile floor. I tried to guess where I was, but since I couldn't move my head, all I could see was the wall next to me. Am I going to die? Where am I being taken? I wondered as I was pulled along in the darkness. I was dragged for a while before feeling a sudden drop, realizing I was being taken down some stairs, which meant we were headed for the basement. As I was dragged down the metal and tile stairs, my head hit each step, causing excruciating pain. I tried to scream, but nothing came out, only tears streaming down my cheeks. Once I reached the bottom of the stairs, I was dragged a bit further through the darkness before coming to an abrupt stop. I could then hear what sounded like hundreds of things scurrying across the concrete floor. Terrified, I felt these things one by one crawling up onto me until my entire body was covered. I lay there, horrified, as these unknown creatures enveloped me. A few minutes passed. Then I heard what sounded like a man shout something from somewhere in the darkness. Instantly, the creatures got off me, and I heard footsteps approaching, stopping abruptly next to me. I was quickly picked up by something and carried through the darkness. Whatever was carrying me reeked of a horrid smell, unlike anything I had ever encountered. After a few minutes, I was tossed to the ground, and the creature walked away, its footsteps fading into the distance. Soon after, I heard the scurrying again, and the creatures returned, crawling all over me once more. Still unable to move or scream, I lay there, consumed by my thoughts. I wanted to roll my eyes into the back of my head and end it all. Sharp pains suddenly shot through my body, like 1,000 needles jabbing into me at once. The pain was so severe that I passed out. The next thing I remember was waking up to a bright light, which appeared to be the moon. I had no idea where I was, but could tell I was no longer in the asylum. As my eyes adjusted, I realized I was in some kind of wooded area, but the trees and vegetation were foreign to me, unlike anything I'd ever seen in real life or in books. The smell was unforgettable, the same stench as the creature that had carried me. Still unable to move or speak, I lay there, paralyzed with fear. I heard something coming up behind me and frantically moved my eyes, thinking I was surely about to die. I began questioning my sanity. Am I going crazy? Where the hell am I? I thought. Suddenly, whatever was behind me stopped, and the body of someone was dropped to the ground right in front of me, inches away. I screamed internally as I saw it was a young man, probably in his late teens. His eyes were wide open, and he was blinking, a look of pure terror on his face that I will never forget. Whatever had been carrying the young man moved off slightly, and I could hear rustling behind me. A few minutes later, it came back towards me, stepped over me, grabbed the young man by the hair, and dragged him about 15 feet in front of me. The creature looked like something only your imagination could conjure up. It had long, smooth, almost beautiful black hair. It wasn't very tall, but it was wide and wore oddly looking clothing, unlike anything I had ever seen before. I could catch glimpses of the side of its face, but can't describe what it looked like. What happened next has been horrifically replaying in my mind every day. I watched in utter horror as the creature tore off the young man's clothing and began consuming him. I could do nothing but look on in pure dread, knowing I was likely next. I could only imagine the excruciating pain he must have been experiencing as his flesh was ripped and torn from his body. The creature fed on him for a while before standing up and walking towards the moon, eventually disappearing into the trees without once looking back at me. Despite the terror, I found myself strangely curious about what its face looked like. I stared at the half-eaten body of the young man for what seemed like hours. During that time, countless thoughts raced through my mind. I thought about my parents and sister, wondering how they were doing. It had been months since I had seen them. I pondered what was happening, where I was, and what that creature was. Had I died and gone to hell? Was I in another world? Crazy ideas flooded my mind as I lay there. After what felt like an eternity, I suddenly found I could move my fingers again. Within a few minutes, I could move my limbs, and it wasn't long before I managed to get up on my knees and eventually stand. As I stood there, looking around, I remember feeling more scared than I had ever been in my life. When I couldn't move, I had given up, but now there was a chance I could survive. I contemplated which way to run and decided to head in the opposite direction of where the creature had disappeared into the trees. I reasoned that maybe the way it had brought the young man from was the way back home. I hadn't walked in a while and my legs were stiff. I stumbled along as best I could through the forest. The further I walked, the more the forest changed from being very thick to more open, with giant trees. I also noticed a change in temperature. It went from hot and humid to cold and dry, almost freezing. I had been walking for a while when I heard something behind me, moving swiftly through the trees. I stopped and began to panic, convinced it was the creature. Looking back, I saw nothing, but my legs were starting to feel better, so I knew I needed to run. I took off running as fast as I could, but my shoes were not made for running, and my dress kept getting snagged on bushes and branches, slowing me down. I tried listening for the creature as I ran, but heard nothing. I decided not to stop and check. It didn't matter anyway. I ran and ran until I was about to pass out from exhaustion. Without warning, I tumbled down a steep hill, and everything went black. Apparently, I woke up 2 years later, which came as quite a shock to me. Like I said at the beginning, over the last 2 years, as I was in a coma, I relived those events in my mind over and over again. It was a nightmare that would not end. Marietta was found by some hunters the following morning, December 8th at 6 a.m., lying on a road deep in what is now known as Redwood National Park, over 300 miles away from the Magdalene Insane Asylum. When she was found, she was quickly taken to the nearest hospital, where they discovered she was covered in hundreds of small bite marks from something unknown. Authorities thoroughly investigated the incident, but never reached a conclusion. How she got there remains a mystery to this day. The case has been investigated by numerous people over the decades, but has never been solved. Her co-workers went to lunch at 3:15 a.m., leaving Marietta still at the front desk. It is at least a 5.5-hour drive from San Francisco to Redwood National Park, and she was discovered at 6 a.m., which is not nearly enough time to make the drive. For more scary horror stories, please subscribe.